So I'm so excited to see all of you. Thank you all for spending a little bit of your day with me. I'm hoping we're going to be here about an hour. I may go a few minutes over, but certainly ask that you save all your questions for the end, and we'll have an opportunity. Hi, come on in. Yes. So you will have the opportunity to ask those questions at the end. So save them, and we'll hopefully have a little time for that at the end. If at any time you need to leave, the restrooms are just right around the corner, a water fountain, or you are always welcome to step out. I talk to people for a living, so I will not be upset if you're moving about the room. Okay, let's dive in. So today we're going to do a few things. We're going to talk about some of the logistical information you're going to need to be a volunteer at Tower Grove House during GLOW. We're going to talk a little bit about what interpretation is, how that's different than other roles you may have filled for us here at the Garden in the past, and how you can present the information to the public that's really going to engage them while you're with us. We're going to talk a little bit about Henry Shaw, just as a nice little background, but I'm going to give you lots of other resources that are hopefully going to help you feel more comfortable. We're going to go room by room digitally on this PowerPoint of the positions that you're going to see available when you go into service to sign up. So listen in there so you can figure out what area might work best for you, make you most comfortable, or might be of the most interest to you while you spend time with us. And then we're going to go through a couple frequently asked questions. We spend a lot of time with our visitors every day, so we're fairly familiar with some of the most commonly asked questions, and we want to share those with you today so you feel comfortable responding to those things. I wanted to share a little bit about who you may see as you are traveling with us on this GLOW journey. I always put in our Manager of Interpretation, Jennifer Wolf. Many of you may be familiar with her. She is wonderful and also works with us during the GLOW, so you may see her at a shift if she is there the night that you are. I'm right there. I take care of all things historic interpretation. So besides curating the collection of Tower Grove House, I also design new exhibits for that space, train all of our wonderful volunteers. I even do signage out in the garden grounds that have to do with history. I do research on our artifacts and all wonderful things Henry Shaw. We also have 7 interpretation assistants that you will meet throughout your time at the house. These individuals are trained through the National Association of Interpretation and work for our team both in the Children's Garden, in the Brookings Exploration Center, and at Tower Grove House. So these individuals are going to be your staff point people while you are there. If you volunteer on the same night, you may get to know the same people, which is a great connection to have, but the staff member with the fancy badge and the fancy jacket that say staff are the people to go to if you ever have any questions, and I'm not there. You also have Andrea Harper here. You met her. As she introduced us here today. She coordinates the volunteer educators, which means she is all things volunteer. If you have any questions regarding service hours, how to work the system, if you're having some challenges signing up, if you have any other volunteer-related questions, she's always happy to help, as well as Scott Bahan. If you guys are familiar with Scott, he is also taking care of all of our volunteers garden-wide. He is always happy to help with volunteer appreciation nights, some of those more technical logistics of volunteering here at the garden. I also put Jay Blair's name on here because his information is also on the back sheet of your booklet. All those phone numbers are going to be on that back page. That shares with you who you may need to call if you have questions. Jay is the event manager for Garden GLOW, and so if you have any questions specifically about the event, he is the man to talk to. He is also going to be who will be providing the training this afternoon if you're going to general GLOW training, so you'll meet him this afternoon if you are attending that. Let's start with requirements and responsibilities, because I like to know that everybody who's joining us, either as a volunteer or a staff member, knows 100% what they're in for, or what the responsibilities of this job are, and if that is something that you feel like you can take care of for us. So acting as an ambassador of MVG and TGH can't be understated at all, because every time you are in the public space, you are a representative of the garden. It's hard to explain, but in many instances, as a volunteer in Tower Grove House, you are one of the first people that a visitor is going to interact with. So being someone who's welcome, open, ready to chat, if they have any questions about anything or find the best resource for them to learn more is really important. Being familiar with the historical content and maintaining your knowledge, that's going to come through both these great quick reference booklets that you have in your hand that are going to have some bullet points. They come through a room-by-room narrative that I will release closer to the event that gives you more of a narrative if you're the type that likes to have something to read aloud or read in more of a story-like system. Yeah. Or if you're looking for more of those conversational pieces. So being familiar with what you have is very important. Again, I mentioned some people like to choose the same room and are there each shift, and that allows you to become very familiar with the artifacts that are in the room, as well as what the stories are that go with it, what the decor from the garden club might be, and really make that a rich experience for our visitors. Encourage participatory learning by engaging visitors in conversation. This is hopefully a room full of people who like to talk, because this is a talking position. And this isn't just talking about where the bathroom is, although sometimes it is. This is talking about what makes our garden's history so rich, what makes Tower Grove House one of the most important parts of the garden, and helping our visitors have a really wonderful and memorable experience at the event. So making sure that you're coming in every day ready to answer all of our visitors' questions, or just asking them how their day is a very important part of this position, and being ready to engage every time you come. It's also important to know some of those technical things, which we will go over here, accessibility, hours, best practices in the house. Those are some of those boundaries that we need to reiterate with our visitors that I hope that you can take with you from this. Tracking your engagements. We'll go through what an engagement is and how you gather statistics in a later slide. And keeping track of your own assigned schedule. So we do use service for this event just like all of our others. If you have challenges with service or need some assistance, myself, Andrea Harper, Scott Bayhan, all of us are more than happy to help make that system work for you. That's the best way to choose the shifts that you'd like to work, as well as cancel if you have a last minute emergency. So scheduling. This opportunity is 2.5 hours. We schedule from 5 to 7:30 and 7:30 to 10:30. It really depends on what your time schedule looks like, what you're most interested in doing. We have 12 shifts available, 6 for each of those shifts. And you'll see on service that they're divided by the room, as I mentioned, which gives you the opportunity to choose where you want to be stationed throughout the house. This also gives you the opportunity to know exactly where you're going. If you do come in for that later shift and a staff member isn't available because it's a really busy night, you'll feel comfortable knowing exactly where you're going, that you're prepared to be there, and that it's an easy transition. You're welcome to sign up as far ahead as possible. This opportunity is going to be made available to you this afternoon after you complete this training, after that fancy test, right, Maureen? No test. But they will be made available to you very soon, so you can start planning the holiday schedule. I know it's very busy, and so we're welcoming you to sign up as early as you'd like. November and December will be available at the same time for us. And if you have any last-minute scheduling conflicts, we ask you to do a few things. First, use service to cancel, because that automatically generates an email that gets sent to me. I would also ask that you call the staff if it's really short notice, because if not, we are very worried about you. We know ahead of time who's coming, and if you don't show up, then we are very worried and often are calling you because we want to make sure that you're okay. And this is my phone number. If I'm not in the office, it generates an email by magic. And that voicemail goes right to my email. I can't get away from it. So I will know exactly what's going on, which is wonderful news, and make sure that our staff is aware. Dress code. I thought I'd throw this in because this is a little bit different than other glow shifts because you are inside. Yay, heat. So you're always asked to wear your garden identification badge. That's what helps our visitors know that you belong here and that you have all of the answers, or at least a few of them. We ask that you either wear your lime green event shirt that many of you have from working other wonderful events throughout the year, or that you wear non-printed clothing with neutral colored bottoms. We also ask that shoes always be comfortable because this is a standing position for the most part. There are some areas that I will go through later that allow for some sitting if that's something that you need throughout your shift. But we always encourage you to be comfortable so that way you're making the rest of our visitors comfortable as well. Parking. Many of you have done glow in past years. Parking is a little bit different this year, and that's okay. Parking is going to be on the upper east lot. Ooh. Pointer. So when you come in the entrance, you'll go to the left this year. I am under the impression at this point that there are no parking passes, which is also interesting and new, but I am told that your badge is your parking pass. So if you come to this area, there will probably be Keystone staff that staff our parking lot. If you show them your volunteer badge, you should have access to this area. That being said, parking is always an issue. The house is approximately 15 minutes from the front gate, so I would encourage you to come early, especially if you are on the later shift, to ensure that you do get a spot and are there in enough time to be comfortable and you don't feel rushed. When you arrive, so many of you have worked glow in past years in different capacities. There is always a check-in here in this building, but in this instance, if you are just volunteering at Tower Grove House, you're welcome to go straight to the house. There's going to be the front door has a gate on it that often says closed, but it will be open around 4:45 every evening if you're the earlier shift. You're able to go inside. The staff will help you find our break room that's in the basement. I wanted to add that this is often key card access. So don't worry if you don't have key card access. We have an extra that lives on the desk that you can use if you come for the later shift and need to get downstairs. But downstairs is where everything is going to happen for you. So there's an area to store your personal effects. Water bottles with lids are allowed on the upper floors. But we ask that there's no food or drink anywhere above the basement level. So that's what we ask our visitors, and we ask our volunteers and staff to do the same. But you are welcome to bring a water bottle with a closed lid. There is also a restroom in the basement for staff and volunteers only. You're going to have a lot of visitors ask you if there's a bathroom because they see a house and they think it has a bathroom. Unfortunately, we are not a public restroom, but you have facilities to become comfortable. And then this is where you're going to sign in. There's a bulletin board in this break room in the basement. We print the list once a week. So if you sign up early for all of your shifts, your name will always appear. If you signed up the day before, which we're always happy to have last minute folks as well, you may not see your name, but you're welcome to write it in where you signed up, and then you just initial next to your name. This lets me know, because I'm not there every day, who is there and who needs to receive credit. If they did not show up for some reason, often our staff are calling. If they can't get a hold of someone, then your name remains blank on that sheet, and I follow up with you, A, to make sure you're okay, but also to see if there's anything I can do to help make your schedule a little bit easier, okay? The next thing you're gonna do after you sign in, you're gonna pick up a clicker to track your interactions. Now, interactions, or engagements as we call them in the education field, are how we count how many times you have had some sort of interaction with another person, oftentimes a visitor, but it could be a volunteer or a staff member, where you feel like they've learned something new from you. So an interaction is not, where's the bathroom? An interaction is you sharing some of the wonderful information that you've learned about the house. You're sharing something about history, the garden's mission. you're sharing more about other things they could see that evening, and you're making their experience a little bit richer. The clicker is very, very important because this is how we track what your impact is. This is how we track what the value of our space is contributing to this event. We can say, our volunteers talked to 5,000 people this week, which is not outside the realm of possibility. Mm-hmm. That's a really big deal. We need to invest in our volunteers, and we need to continue to have our facilities in tip-top shape because we're making an impact. So your efforts in showing our impact are always appreciated, and we encourage you to keep your clicker clicking as you chat with people. At the end of your shift, there will be a sheet on the reception desk that the staff can direct you to. This is where you write that number down. It's going to be a nice, beautiful chart that has what room you were in and what time you were there, and all you got to do is put the number that's on that clicker. Thumbs up? Yes? Mm-hmm. Great. In case of an emergency, any emergency, the staff are the lead person there, but we want to go through some of these only because it's extremely important that you know that staff are always there to support you, but visitors will look to you as the volunteers and representatives of the garden in case of an emergency. There's a first aid kit located in the break room in the basement. Band-aids, little things you're welcome to give out on your own. If there's a serious emergency, of course, we always encourage you to call 911. Hi, Rita. But we also ask that you only have those certified in first aid and CPR provide that service. All of our staff are. So in that situation, the staff will also take the lead. We also ask that safety be your priority. If there is a fire, for example, we encourage you to move everyone out of the building, out of one of the 2 exits that will be available, and move out towards the Piper Observatory, which is the big yellow, beautiful tower to the left of where the house is. If robbery or theft occurs, I would encourage you to let your closest staff person know, but also let it happen. If it's close to you, please do not engage that situation because you are our first priority. We have to add that because we do have a money box that sits right in the first room. You never know what's going to happen. Inclement weather is the most important thing I'd like to share with you because Tower Grove House is designated as a storm shelter. That's what happens in old houses. They're built real sturdy. So what you're going to do is take everybody to that basement area that you'll become familiar with as our break room and lead those visitors down there, and the staff person will take it from there. The other important thing to mention about inclement weather is that if for some reason we see that a storm is coming, the garden responds as weather happens, but sometimes it could be 5 o'clock and the storm's not coming till later, but we're still open. We want you to do what's best for you. If for some reason we see a big storm coming and you're not comfortable driving, that's okay. Give us a call, let us know that you're safe, and we will handle things. I want you guys to make decisions based on safety, especially when it comes to bad weather, which does happen. If GLOW is canceled for a reason like that, you will receive a phone call from myself or another management staff person letting you know that we have canceled that and that you should stay home and be safe. Okay? This is very important before we rush into some history. Interpretation of historic documents is never a straightforward matter. We like to add that in there because many of you have learned a variety of things about the history of the garden, depending on your role here. And you may hear something today that I say that sounds a little bit different than what you've heard before. History is open for interpretation. We know facts, but the presentation can be different all the time. You're going to hear things that other staff or volunteers say in this event. And you're going to say, that might not sound right. If you think it doesn't sound right, please come talk to me. If you think it's something that's wildly different than what you think it should be, please come talk to me. But you must enter this knowing that everybody presents this information differently, especially depending on the audience. Different people equal different interpretation. All of your visitors are going to be coming to you with a different life experience, different backgrounds, different ideas about what they're interested in or what's going to connect them to the space. We want you to remember that every person is going to understand what you're saying differently. And so being mindful of that helps us remember that not every connection point is going to work for everybody. Not everything that you're interested in is going to be something that someone else is interested in. But using questioning and asking people some of those questions that are open-ended and allow them to look around and respond to you is going to give you some of those clues about what really is going to help them have a great experience.
Excuse me.
Yes.
Sorry to interrupt.
No, of course.
I took a picture of
Yes,
that
yes,
slides. Is that
yes.
okay?
Yes, that's perfectly
Okay,
fine.
Thank you.
No problem. We can know a fact today, but not tomorrow. A reminder that we're always doing research here at the garden. We're always discovering new things. And so continuing to learn and opening yourself to other resources is extremely important. I've brought a few of the books that are kind of the staples about learning about Henry Shaw and the history of the garden. Those are available in our gift shop, and I have a few copies that I could lend to someone who is a inquisitive mind, and hope you learn a little bit more if you really want to dive right in. But knowing what you can about what is factual is going to help you figure out what the best connection points for our visitors are. So what is interpretation? Interpretation is a communication process. This is the most important part of this, because interpretation isn't something that I write down and then you repeat. Interpretation is about the process that allows people to understand information that becomes personally relevant to them. It forges those emotional and intellectual connections. People remember what you're saying when they can personally connect to it. We could stand here and I could spew facts and dates and names at you, and you would say, oh, okay, that's cool. But until you start providing some of those emotional connections, that people start to understand people who lived in this space, who and why they would have done the things that they would have done, and that's when people start to create opportunities for that memory to open and for them to start to engage with you in the space. This means knowing your audience and asking questions. You're going to see so many different people in this experience, it's going to blow your mind. So being constantly aware of the fact that if we wanted to have robots, we would just hire robots to repeat the same thing over and over again. We want you guys to find the best ways to connect with people, to share what is most interesting, and help them even learn just one new thing about the space. These are the goals of our whole interpretation department. Now, this is quite lofty and a very long list, but it's important because the first one is my favorite. This is our goal here: forging relationships between people, plants, and the past. A lot of our visitors are coming to us locally, and so they're very interested in how Mr. Shaw and this garden affect the St. Louis community. They want to know when this house was built compared to everything else in St. Louis, or how Mr. Shaw came here and where his business was. They want to know how this place impacted the growth of our city and the creation of this garden. It also helps if we can get past this first one, then we can foster that appreciation for nature and history. Our goal in being open any time of year, but especially during Glow, isn't just for people to come in and say, oh, that's pretty. They're going to say that because it is. But forging those connections is what encourages people to come back again and again to learn one new thing each time. If they learn one new thing from you, they're going to continue to come back and learn more. This is my favorite slide. You, right here, you are the Velcro that takes information and connects it to a person. Again, we could have robots. We could also just write everything onto a panel and they could read it. But people don't learn, not all people learn by reading, not all people learn by listening. People want to hear stories that help them feel like they're there, that they're personally connected. to Mr. Shaw, to the space, to the people who worked there, to the Trelease family, to anybody who's ever been a part of that space. You are the Velcro. I love this. I love this. Okay, here we are, room by room. This is the quick and dirty version. I cannot understate to you that I could literally stand up here and talk to you for hours about this, but we're going to do this as quickly as possible. I want to reiterate, you are not expected to remember everything that's in that book, everything that I say up here. This is not like school. This is an opportunity for you to learn more about the spaces and then be able to make informed decisions when you're deciding where you want to share information with our visitors, okay? Yes,
I
Rita?
apologize, I was late.
No, you're
So
fine, Rita.
What is the theme this year, like last year?
We're almost there. We're almost there. No, we're there. I'm excited too. We're almost there. Henry Shaw. I hope everyone in this room is at least familiar with that name. But Henry Shaw is the founder of our garden. His home is where we will be enjoying this year's Garden Glow. But Mr. Shaw is a very complicated man. A lot of the content that we'll be talking about today talks more about who he is versus what he did, which sounds strange, but go with me on this journey. Here's the timeline. Only here because some people love dates. Some people love to know when things are happening. That's how some people learn. You are not expected to remember this whole thing. There is no test or compulsory learning here. However, all of these bullet points to me are opportunities to learn a little bit more about our community and what was going on at that time. So to many people to say, the garden was opened in 1859. Some people say, okay. But until you say, the garden was opened the year before the Civil War, then people are starting to put together a picture in their mind. Then we're saying, oh, a few years later, an act of legislation authorized Tower Grove Park. Okay, that's nice. But who's there? Oh, we're already one of the second largest cities in the United States. That's kind of a big deal, St. Louis. St. Louis is growing compared to 1819 when Henry Shaw arrived here, and it was a couple city blocks. Starting to use that visual language to contextualize these dates, throwing these dates out, not going to get much of a response. You're going to get that dead pan look, you know, that deer in headlights look where people are like, cool. Okay.
Where's the bathroom?
Once we start to contextualize some of these, you're going to get better results.
So when he commissioned Barnett to build the two homes, was that Tower Grove home and the city home?
Yes. Yes, ma'am. This is the more important slide to me. What was Henry Shaw like? Because a lot of times people come inside, they say, oh, this is just some rich white guy. This is just some rich guy that lived here. Okay, it's pretty, it's elaborate, it's ornate. All of those things are true. But until you start talking to people about who he was, people don't appreciate the magnitude of what Mr. Shaw started in both creating the garden and contributing to the community. So some of my favorite words, private. We're going to have a lot of questions about if Mr. Shaw's married. A lot of them. Because people don't understand why there's just 2 bedrooms. Why wouldn't a man at that time be married? That's a good question. But Mr. Shaw was very successful at being private. Not just he was the most successful person I've ever known in keeping his personal life to himself. So we cannot say for or against if he was running all over town with this woman, if he was gay, if this or that. We could speculate for a long time, and our visitors like to do that, which is fine. But all we can share is this man was very private. Can you imagine what it would take in a city like St. Louis to be one of the most well-known characters, but to not have your private life all over the front page, except in one instance, which we'll go through later. Controlling. That's usually a pretty negative word. I wouldn't see that and say, I want to be called controlling. However, when you start to characterize some of the decisions that were made, people are going to ask you questions about why the townhouse was here. Well, he wanted to make sure his legacy continued forever and didn't want his city home to ever be torn down. That's kind of controlling. He moved the whole thing here brick by brick the year after he died. That's kind of intense. People often ask, why are certain things in certain places? That's where Mr. Shaw wanted it. He's the only person buried on garden grounds. People will ask you a lot of questions about the mausoleum. He's the only person allowed to be buried here. And we are an organization today because of what he set forward. These aren't just facts about our organization. This has to do with the personality of the man who began this space. Lucky is also a word that we talk about a lot because people want to know how Mr. Shaw made his money. Mr. Shaw came up from a fairly well-to-do family. However, he came here at the age of 19, chose St. Louis, among other cities in the New World, to start a business, and within 30 years had made over $250,000 in that time.
That's a lot.
That's a lot. Yes, Maureen?
Haley, are there like principal biographers of Shaw, or
Yes.
where did a lot of this information come
Yes,
from?
this man here, William Barnaby Faraday, wonderful man. He's the primary biographer of Mr. Shaw. However, this man's primary sources are our archives. Mr. Shaw, very particular, kept records of everything. We have listings of all of the furniture being purchased, all of the homes being built. We have all of his business records of what was sold and bought and shipments and everything. Mr. Shaw was very concerned with his reputation and legacy, and part of that was keeping very particular records. I would say to characterize him as the early version of a workaholic is not inappropriate, because he spent a lot of time making sure that his affairs were in order, probably to his personal life discredit. Did that answer your question? Perfect. This year's theme, Rita was on it, a couple slides away. Christmas themes. Christmas cards of the Victorian era. Who loves to send Christmas cards? I do. I love it. Christmas cards were invented in the Victorian era. So the tradition of having cards mass printed and sent to friends began in the Victorian era. But the Victorian era, because of industrialization, saw people moving away from their immediate family, moving to cities, even if they were just 30 miles, 40 miles, far enough away that they weren't celebrating every holiday together anymore. A gentleman in the 1840s decided, you know what, I really like this picture. I'm going to send it to everybody. I have enough money to just mass produce this. And printing had advanced far enough that he could do that. So he sent the same picture to all of his friends with a message, and thus the Christmas card was born. So our garden clubs decorate each room on the west side of the home, and depending on where you choose to stand, people may be asking you questions about which garden club has been the creative mover of that room. But I offered all of our, I offered all of our decorators the opportunity to choose a Christmas card as their inspiration. No?
It's plugged in.
Okay.
Oh, now it is. Now it's charging.
Thank you. Thank you.
Laura. Thank you.
So by offering them a card, in all of the rooms that the garden clubs have decorated, you'll find a laminate of the Christmas card that is their inspiration from that time period. There are going to, I think one of our clubs has chosen to put cards on the tree in that room, and you know, we're going to see a lot that have to do with these cards. But many of these give a great opportunity to both share botanical themes, because many of them are botanically inspired, but also to ask a variety of our visitors what they see in this room that kind of compares with that, because you're going to see where the garden clubs have taken their inspiration from and how that's come to life in the room. Now I hope all of you have experienced Tower Grove House during your own Glow experience. I hope you're all here because you've been to Garden Glow and really enjoyed coming into the house. But we operate a one-way path that contains the amount of traffic. Mr. Shaw's home was not designed to see thousands of people. So we try to keep one-way traffic moving through the entire house So today I'll be taking you on that path and what you're gonna expect in those rooms. The reception room is that first room that you walk into. In normal visitation, it's the room with the desk and the chairs where people are allowed to sit. This is the first room that someone would come in and look at. You're going to have a staff person welcoming them to the house. So you'll have one person outside controlling the line, providing the boundaries of the house, which include no food or drink. It's unfortunately not accessible, but that also means strollers need to be parked outside. And making sure that if it's a bad weather night, that they're putting their umbrellas in bags and things like that. So they're doing the police work, as I like to call it. But then there'll be someone at the front door who controls the door. We do have a fire code. It's a lot less people than you think it is, and when we're close to it, it feels like that many people. So a staff person is opening and closing the door. Closing the door also ensures that we are keeping our temperature as controlled as possible, which is very challenging in this space. But there'll be historic photos streaming, and there is a space where people can sit if they have the need to sit down. They've been walking this entire time. There is an area. The line is often standing in this area, waiting to move along. When you get into the first floor east wing, this is one of the shifts you'll see on service. This is a combination of that first room that you enter there that usually has our programming in it. It has a changing exhibit. This right now, it's about the ways that we've educated people for the last 150 years here at the garden. But this is where our primary activity, ornament making, takes place. That can get kind of messy, as you can imagine, and needs restocked. You'd also be surprised what people will put on a public Christmas tree, so it takes a little policing as well. But a lot of folks who take this shift enjoy standing in the kitchen. So the kitchen gives you an opportunity to share foodways at that time, who would have been preparing the meals for Mr. Shaw, all of his servants, but the types of foods that they would have been eating. In the past, we've had recipe cards, which I'm hoping to reprint for this year, that you can hand out to folks that give them kind of an idea of what sort of recipes would have been popular during that time. This is also a position that could give you the opportunity to sit if you need to sit in that block, because there is a chair that you could place kind of in the exhibit. There's just a stanchion in the kitchen. And so this could be a good seated position if you need that. Then people will travel up the back stairs, which take you to the rest of the rebuilt side of the house, which is what I've tried to represent here. The person is stationed right by the bathroom, the historic bathroom, which sounds kind of strange, but is a very, very important role because the bathroom is very interesting to a lot of our visitors. It's original to the year 1890. It's going to show you a tin-lined tub. It's going to show you all of the original fixtures, gravity-fed toilet. It's beautiful. However, it also gives you a platform to talk about the Trelease family, someone that a lot of our visitors don't really know anything about. The house would have been rebuilt in the year 1890, which you're seeing here, when Dr. Trelease would have been chosen after Henry Shaw's death to take over the garden and be the director. But he would have moved in with a family, eventually to have 5 children, and would have needed some more modern amenities. The architect for this side of the house during the rebuild was chosen specifically for his affinity for plumbing. His skills were in the plumbing business, and they knew that they wanted indoor running water, a bathroom, as well as that kitchen that they just passed through. So talking about the 2 different sides of the house kind of offer the opportunity, if you like to teach with compare and contrast. You're seeing a certain aesthetic on one side, and then they're going to walk into the upstairs of the west wing, which is original to Mr. Shaw in 1849, and see something that looks very different. So the individual who takes the second floor bedrooms position is going to stand right over here. And they help direct traffic because these are relatively small rooms. The flow goes through this guest bedroom and then into Henry Shaw's bedroom and back out and down the stairs. So you will do a little bit of traffic control because some people want to skip here or there, and that can kind of cause a problem with the line. But you also have a lot to talk about in this area. This door goes out to the tower and has photos on the wall that show you what the views from the tower would have looked like. So you could talk about Mr. Shaw watching his garden being built and stories like that. You also have the opportunity to talk about things that are inside both of the bedrooms, depending on where your interest lies. So there's going to be portraits on the wall of scientists that would have stayed in Mr. Shaw's house, as well as a portrait of his sister Caroline, who would have helped build this house, as well as contributed to Mr. Shaw's life on a personal level. There's also
Someone told me the other night I looked like her. I wasn't sure
oh,
what
that's
to do with that.
very interesting.
I was like, I don't know if that's a compliment.
This is a Wardian case.
Next to me scared me.
Sorry. This is a very important part of the room. A Wardian case would have been the first way that people could have transported live plants across the world, and was invented in the Victorian period. So this really represents how live plants were moved from area to area. If you are interested in this position, I have more information about this cool little thing, because it's a very neat story that a lot of visitors really enjoy. This room also has a closet, which is a very big deal in the Victorian period. In many states, you were taxed per room, and a closet counted as a room. So having a closet was a special kind of amenity that all of the rooms in Mr. Shaw's house have. It's also important to mention that this room is decorated by Farm Trails Garden Club. The next will be decorated by Ladue Garden Club. But there's a lot of beautiful furniture in this room. We talk a lot about the end of Mr. Shaw's life, because he would eventually pass in that room. There's a beautiful painting on the wall that a lot of people are very interested in, that give you the opportunity to talk about how art was acquired. It's a copy of a painting in a museum, and sharing kind of how art is recreated can be really fun for a lot of people. Once you come down those front stairs, then they'll immediately enter the front parlor. This is decorated by Four Winds Garden Club, and they always have a great display, but the piano is definitely the centerpiece of this room. Besides the more salacious story of the case of Effie Karsting, which I will share at a later date, the piano is important during the holidays, because that would have been the centerpiece of entertainment, yes. And a lot of our favorite Christmas carols were written in the Victorian period. So tales like Good King Wenceslas and some of the things we still sing today were written at that time, which a lot of people really connect with. That's a very personal thing. Songs that they know would have been played on that piano. And the dining room is decorated by Southwoods, and that's going to be completely set for a traditional dinner. If you like to talk about food, this is also a good place to be, because you're able to share what an actual meal would have looked like in Mr. Shaw's house, because we do have records of the types of things he would have served. The basement. The basement is another position. So this is just one position, as well as the one that we looked at before. The basement is also a position, and while many of you are thinking a basement, what are we going to do in a basement? The basement is a very, very important area. One room talks about the people who would have worked for Mr. Shaw during the course of his life to help build what they're seeing today. This is a combination of immigrant workers, hired labor, local craftsmen, as well as slaves. And we will get further on to talking about tough topics. But this room, I hear from a lot of feedback, as well as Andrea, that this is one of the rooms where you can have really deep engagements with people, because you're talking about people, and they're able to relate, oh, my grandfather was an immigrant, or my grandfather was a trade worker. In the next room, it talks about the local farm that would have been behind the house. A lot of people really connect to farm implements and those types of traditional crafts. So this can be a very cool place to talk to people about what it really took to build a garden of this magnitude. The final position, where everyone exits, is out the back door. This is different than during the rest of the year, so this takes a little bit of coaching. The person who is in this informal dining room area, or called the back door exit, is someone that needs to be politely assertive in making sure that everybody goes out the correct exit. I see you back there, Joe, laughing at me. I know. But this is where things can get a little hectic if you're not offering people the correct door to go out of. Because many people are accustomed to coming back out the front door, and that's not how one-way traffic works.
And then people want to come in the back.
And people absolutely see the light, and then they want to come in the back door, and that's definitely not going to happen.
Yeah, I have a question.
Yes.
So what time period is considered the Victorian era?
So the Victorian era is generally considered the course of Queen Victoria's life. That, of course, in all historic periods, you're talking about, so at that time they weren't saying we lived in the Victorian era. So most historians consider it about 1830 all the way until the 1890s. Even though that was shortly after her death, a lot of the decor and cultural traditions were still the same. No problem. And so this back door area is decorated by the Herb Society, but definitely gives you an opportunity to engage with people. We give out these wonderful little coloring books to all of our little ones that love to have something to take home with them. It's a cold winter's evening in Shaw's Garden. The illustrations are adorable, but give you an opportunity to connect with the little people. It's also a great way to help people learn more about what's next. So if you're the type of person that likes to help give people those options about what they'll see moving forward, this is the spot for you. Are you all still with me?
Yeah.
Oh, yeah.
I feel like I'm talking a mile a minute, but we're almost there. It's also important to delineate what we consider the original house and the new wing. So many people, just by observation, are going to see that difference between what the west wing looks like, the ornateness, the door frames, the woodworking, and those types of details, with what is considered the new area or the east side of the house. People are going to ask you questions about the difference, so I would encourage you to stay up with some of those comparisons to allow people to kind of see how this house has had multiple lives. So what you're seeing, in this instance, our visitors are experiencing the 1890 side that Dr. Trelease would have been overseeing and living in when he was the director of the garden. But before Shaw's death, it's important to point out, especially say if you're upstairs in the bedrooms, Mr. Shaw only had a chamber pot. Mr. Shaw had no indoor lighting. They would have used candles. The heat would have come only from the fireplace. Can you imagine how cold it would be in here if a cold burning fire was not lit right now? Those types of comparison things, especially with our younger generation, helps kind of get those wheels turning about how life would have been very different for Mr. Shaw and how those improvements would have been made.
I have a question.
Yes.
What about the bedrooms in the east wing? Are those being renovated? What? Because I've had questions about those.
Yes. I always joke with people, just like at your house, if you don't want someone to see something, you just shut the door. And people usually laugh.
Yeah.
But
I
yes,
told them that they're being renovated and they're
Yes.
closed off until they're...
right now they are storage, but the intention in the long term is to better share the life of the Trelease family and how the garden moved forward after Mr. Shaw as a whole. Timeline, not important.
Okay. That's why, because I've had them ask, well, when will they be opened? And it's like,
When you
there's enough money.
put some money in that box, and we say thank you.
that's, yeah.
Yes, Maureen.
When did the house stop becoming a living quarters for somebody?
Yes, the house in the 1920s. Mr. Shaw and Dr. Trelease are the only directors who lived in that home. The house that our current director now lives in, Dr. Weiss Jackson, is the home that was built in the 1920s, and every director since that time has lived in that home. It's an important, let's start over. It's an opportunity to share Mr. Shaw's particularness. The director lives on garden ground, not by chance. Mr. Shaw decided that in his will. So that's another opportunity to share how very particular Mr. Shaw was. He was even deciding where future people were living. But that is, yes.
Where is that house?
It's at the corner.
Southeast corner.
It's the southeast corner of the garden. So behind the admin building.
Yeah, when
But
you
closed
start
to the
walking,
public.
you find a sign that says private residence.
Yes,
Mhm.
yes.
You know, that-
You can see it's a beautiful home, and you can see it through the fence, and it looks very 1920s. It's beautiful. Okay.
I have a question.
Yes.
Here's a will.
Yes.
Is it say why do you choose that particular person to be director?
It does not, but Dr. Trelease and Mr. Shaw had a working relationship prior to his death. They knew each other from the botanical world, and he had, I wouldn't say he ever interviewed him like a job interview, but he certainly knew him.
Yeah, he
Yes.
didn't describe any reason why.
No, no. Yes, Joe.
Trelease was on the faculty of Washington University, the George Engelman Chair of Botany that Shaw endowed. So he was kind of almost, when the trustees picked the second director, he was almost kind of given.
The obvious choice, yes. Yes, thank you, Joe. Another reminder, we do have lots of children in during this time of year. This is very much a family event. These are some ideas about open-ended questions. Open-ended questions work best with a lot of children because that's how they're accustomed in school to learning. It gives them the opportunity to do some cognitive thinking in that they're seeing something in front of them, describing it back to you, and then making the connections along the way. So asking them comparative questions gives them the opportunity to think about their own life experience, like have you ever visited a house like this before? Or do you see anything that's different than your house? Gives them the opportunity to think about what they think of as a house, look at what they see in front of them, and see what the differences and similarities are. There's these open-ended questions definitely give them the opportunity to look a little bit closer because many of them easily get distracted with the tall ceilings and the lights and the colors and the amount of stuff going on. So if you do have the opportunity to make those connections, I would encourage you to do so. With the very few minutes I have left, I am going to give you some examples of commonly asked questions that need a good answer and need a thoughtful answer that often have to do with personal relationships, both you being forthcoming and honest with our visitors and how Mr. Shaw's personal life can be answered. So let me scroll here. This one is a very good one. Was Henry Shaw married? You're going to get that question a lot. He was not married. He never had any children. They're going to want to know more. People by nature want to know some of these types of things, not because they're gossip, well, some of them are gossipy, but many of them want to know the types of things that they can relate to. It's a very human thing to relate to relationships, marriage, those interpersonal types of relationships. It's very important that you allow visitors to make their own assertions. In many of these instances, especially with these tough questions, especially if they're saying, oh, I bet he was gay and this and that, making those kinds of assumptions, that you provide the factual information that you know. You can say, that's an interesting idea. We know that Mr. Shaw had been very busy in the time in his life where he probably would have gotten married. When he moved to St. Louis at the age of 19, there probably wouldn't have been very many eligible ladies in his social bracket. Then he went to work for 20 years and made a whole lot of money and was very particular about his work. In fact, he was a workaholic. Also doesn't help your dating life. He was also a man of a certain amount of social class. He could date whoever he wanted to without very many questions. And kind of helping people understand this man was very private. We can't say for certain or not what you're asking, but this is what we do know. And try to allow people to make better decisions instead of making assumptions because they don't have information. Does that come forward? This question. This question, is the garden haunted? Okay. So we get a lot of questions about this. A lot of questions about this. And since Halloween was yesterday, let's talk about it. A lot of people want to know if the garden, if Tower Grove House is haunted, what's going on with that. In most cases, during the majority of the year, I encourage anybody who asks me that question to Google it. I'm not kidding. Because if they do Google it, they're going to get something. And they can come to those understandings on their own. It's not my job, nor is it any of your jobs, to share the folklore of the garden. While it is interesting, while it's kind of fun, unfortunately, it really can turn off a lot of people and be a very, very distracting thing to a lot of our visitors. I have visitors who come to the house that say, I've heard this is haunted, I do not want to come in.
Exactly.
That's a problem for me because my job is to share the history of the garden with everyone. And that's what all of you are here to do as well. It's also not my intention ever to encourage, especially children, to think that all old things are haunted, which is what they learn from the media, from movies and books. That's what they know. And so helping them know that, yeah, all old things have a life of their own. Every place can have energy, but this is what's really important about this place. It's definitely not a ghost or if it's haunted. What's important about this place is that this is where our garden began from, and this is why this area that I'm standing in right now is so cool. You with me? Yes, Maureen?
Does that mean the answer is no? I mean, you just talked for a couple of minutes and you didn't really answer that question.
Right.
Doesn't want us to.
So the answer, so that's why this type of question is not for me to answer. And I would encourage you to not feel that it's your responsibility to answer that either.
Google it.
If people do have questions, there's plenty of resources out there for them to learn more about that. If they do Google it, they will get plenty of information. But I am never going to want to be a vehicle to put that out into the world that yes, absolutely, this is happening, or no, that's not happening, and try to be. So because it's a sensitive type of question, I would encourage people to learn more about it.
So once I go home and Google that this afternoon after I leave here, am I going to share what I find when I Google it, or am I just going to continue
No,
to
just,
suggest that other people Google it?
Just leave it to the visitor to research their own.
I tell our everyday Tower Grove House volunteers that I cannot control if you feel like you've had your own experience and you share that with a person in the public. I would encourage you to share as much of the history as you can. And if somebody asks you that question, say, this has been my personal experience, but it's not something that's confirmed or denied. Because we can't say for certain that is true or not.
Can
Yes.
I add one thing?
Yeah.
This is important to me and also others who are curious about this.
Mm-hmm.
Is that when somebody asks that kind of question, is we really do not know individual their spiritual level. So therefore, it's a respect of their private knowledge. Just say, Google it, and leave it to their acceptance how far they can go.
I have people who come all the time and tell me, oh, I feel this, I feel this. I say, that's wonderful. If that's what you're feeling in this space, then that's your prerogative to feel that. And that I don't discredit them. I say that's very interesting. Tell me more about that. But that's not anything factual that I can share with them. Yes.
Haley, where's that photo taken?
This photo was taken in the museum building. And so this is where Henry Shaw was laid in state, the year that, or when he passed away. Thousands of people would have come to the garden to come see him lie in state here in this building. And then he was immediately moved across the way into the mausoleum for his final resting place. So people love this photo because you also get to see the inside of the building. All the palms were very trendy at that time, ferns. But you can see the railing where the pictures are hanging. And that's also in your booklet. People, are going to ask about the construction. The museum building should be open in spring of 2018. So people are going to ask what the timeline for that is, and so I would encourage them.
Speaking of the booklet, I don't know if I'm missing something when you talked about the kitchen. I don't see that noted.
It's not in that booklet. You're correct. As I mentioned before, I write room narratives for each room, and they will be distributed digitally right before the event, and then they'll be on site for you to read if you come early for your shift. That room, because it is in the newer wing of the house, doesn't have quite the same level of artifacts inside of it. It's more of a displayed kitchen. But there is more information to come about that if that's the room that you choose, okay? Yeah.
Are you gonna talk about the original kitchen having been in the basement, or
I
not
ca-
talk about that?
I certainly can share some of that information with you. We don't know exactly where that kitchen was, so oftentimes that leads to more questions than answers, if people are asking that question. But I can certainly put that in my notes to add, okay?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Years ago, I think, I may be misremembering, the training told us that the front bedroom was the housekeeper's room.
Mhm.
We didn't characterize it as the guest bedroom, but I didn't hear any mention of the housekeeper in your discussion.
Right, so the housekeeper's bedroom would be the first bedroom closest to the door on the east side of the house, and that room is not open to the public. So the guest room would be the decored room for guests. The housekeeper's bedroom would have been through that threshold that goes onto the east side of the house and is not open to the public. So there's some content on the wall about it, if somebody's standing there and reading the information. But we don't go.
Different facts, what I learned before is not what I'm learning
So
now.
then, but if, like Rebecca Edom, when she lived there with Mr. Shaw, that if that whole side was turned down, her room would have been.
Right, exactly. The other very important thing I want to cover before we go is the topic of slavery. We cover this in a fair amount of detail on a panel in the basement. If you choose to do the basement shift, you will get questions about this. This is a very, very important topic that the garden wants to cover. We want to make sure that all those people who are coming know that this is not something that we shy away from, that we are trying to sweep under the rug. This is very much a real part of history. However, it takes a very special person to do the shift in the basement, because it takes somebody who's willing to take on a lot of those emotions that visitors are going to give you in regard to this and not respond. So it is our job in this instance as an interpreter to provide the factual information, to learn as much as we can about the facts of Mr. Shaw owning slaves, which includes him being on the fence about it when he first moved to the United States. We have many quotes that say, I'm not really sure how this is going to work out, but eventually purchasing slaves, having about a dozen, and then putting them in his first will. A lot of people read that he had in his first will that they were to receive property and their freedom upon his death, and then nothing after that, because they eventually ran away on the Underground Railroad. Henry Shaw sent a bounty hunter to capture them, and then he sold them before the Civil War. So he was out of the slave business before the Civil War. This means that because he's a private person, we have no idea how that impacted his life, how these individuals were treated, where they lived, what their tasks even would have been. The majority of the information we have come from tax records. As I mentioned, it's very important for us to address this, but allow people to have a response to this. You're going to hear people say, I hate Henry Shaw. That's just an immediate reaction that people have to this topic, and that's okay. You're there to share the facts of what we know about this topic and then contextualize it in St. Louis at that time. So the community that Henry Shaw would have lived within would have found this to be an acceptable practice. Mr. Shaw was a very economic individual and would have been doing what other men of his social class were doing at that time. It is extremely unfortunate. It is certainly an ugly part of American history, but it's important for us to share that with the public. I have resources. If you feel like this is a task that you want to take on, that talk about the best ways to engage people with this topic. Because some people are just going to come at you with raw emotion. That I wanted to ensure that this was in our presentation, so that way you know if you're working in the basement, that this is a topic that you need to be prepared to handle in the most factual, non-emotional way. There is never a reason that you should share your own opinions about what you think about Henry Shaw, that you should make an excuse for this fact about our history at the garden, that this is what happened factually, and these individuals contributed to the wealth that Mr. Shaw occurred, and as well as building the garden. We don't have a record of if they contributed to the landscaped areas. It's most likely they worked on the working farm that would have been directly behind the house, or as inside help. That's it. And that's really hard because people really want to know, what does he mean? Did he do this? Did he do this? You can give them the facts and they can take from it what they can glean. Dewey, hi, yeah.
So a story I heard is that his mother never came to the garden because of the study.
That is a fairly large factor. Yes, we
That
have
is a true statement?
we have in a letter that because of her religious beliefs, she did not believe in the institution of slavery, but not just because Henry Shaw owned slaves, but because St. Louis
Right.
was a place where slavery was still very much alive and well at that time. Is that the only reason? Probably not.
No.
But
It isn't.
those types of personal things, though, indicate that this wasn't just a complicated issue. This was a complicated issue for everyone.
I know.
That his own family was saying, we're not really into this, but Henry Shaw decided, for some reason, to continue that. That's powerful in some ways.
You know, during the Civil War time,
Mm-hmm.
majority was Indians.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely, and some people forget that.
Because of the time of during the time,
Mm-hmm.
the grief and all phenomena, environment,
Right.
have to be considered that because
Right.
it was a history.
Right. And contextualizing that helps people understand more about it. Again, not to make an excuse, but to help people broaden their view that Henry Shaw was just a cog in a wheel of many other individuals in this city who were benefiting from owning other humans. So if this is a challenge you want to take on and you want to learn more, I have a ton of resources that I would love to give you so that you feel as prepared as possible to take this on. It's very sensitive, and I want to make sure our visitors, if they're ready to have a dialogue about this, that you feel prepared to have that dialogue with them. The only other thing I want to add, we're at time, and so I want to respect your time and give room for questions. If you all need to go, I completely understand, but we got hopefully about 5 more minutes. The only thing else that's very important is to remind people that we are open. You're going to hear a lot of people say, this is never open. Not true. We are open April through December, Wednesday through Sunday, 10 to 4. And we have lots of really cool things that happen. We have daily programs, we have story time, we have seek and find sheets, we have adult classes that come through the house, we always have volunteer interpreters on staff. Plug, if you really love GLOW, we do volunteer training for the whole year in March, so if you fall in love with doing this, there's more opportunities to volunteer. But we also do a lot of research about our artifacts to make sure that we're telling people as much as we can about the life and times of how our house was created, the objects that are inside of it, why they're important to culture, and we are constantly trying to learn new things about that. So, I got there. Do we have any more questions? Yes, me too. As I mentioned, it is important that when you go on service and you think you might want to know more about a certain room or that you want to be in a certain area, and if you need more resources, this is what I am here for. I'm happy to talk to any of you at any time about the position, about what you could expect in that area, if you're ready to take on some challenges, or you're ready to tell people that they can't come in the back door. I'm ready to help you through any of those situations. Email, phone, carrier pigeon, come by the house, I have like 5 offices here. I'm happy to chat. If you need anything to make this the most comfortable, we are here for you. As I mentioned, Andrea is always ready to answer your service-related questions. Always, yes. Yes.
Will your presentation be available online?
I can see what I can do,
as-
yes.
As a.
And I write notes. I'm one of these old people that